In this video, I'm going to show you how to download and install Android Studio, which is the program we're going to be using to write our Android applications in this course. So this is a video for the Linux platform. So if you're running Windows or a Mac, there's a separate video in this section you can follow along with and watch for those operating systems. But if you're using Linux, you're in the right place. Now it's possible that you might be running a 32-bit version of Linux. If that's the case, I'd seriously suggest you consider installing a 64-bit version the next time you rebuild your computer. Now to check is quite easy. We can just open a terminal and we just type uname space -m, and that'll tell you whether you're running a 64 or 32-bit version. You can see in my case it's reporting x86_64, so that's clearly me running a 64-bit version. But if you see i386 or i686, that means you're running a 32-bit version of Linux. Android Studio now includes its own installation of Java, but only ships with a 64-bit version, and that won't work on a 32-bit Linux system. In June 2019, Google announced that they're dropping support actually for 32-bit systems. The 32-bit version of Android Studio will be deprecated, in other words no longer available, in December 2019, and the 32-bit Android emulators, which you use to run Android apps on your computer, well, they were also deprecated in June 2019. So you can find an announcement about that. I'll just close the terminal window for now. We'll open a new tab. I'll paste in this link, which is available in the resources section of this video. And this blog post from Google has got a lot more information about it. So if you're using a 32-bit version of Linux, do consider updating to a 64-bit version. You can always dual boot if you need a 32-bit version for some games. Now distros like Ubuntu have now committed to keeping the 32-bit libraries on their 64-bit versions, so most programs should continue to work on a 64-bit version of Linux. So we can go ahead now and install Linux, install Android Studio I should say, by doing a search for install Android Studio. And we want to go and visit the first website that's got developer.android.com in the URL, which is this top one. Click on that. And basically you want to make sure that you are at developer.android.com, so you're basically downloading from the official source. I'm going to click on download the latest version of Android. Noting that for me, you can see down the bottom there it says 3.5 for Linux 64-bit, 729 megabytes. It's 3.5 is, as of the time I'm recording this video, the latest version. But if you see a higher version and it is released, which it is on the screen, then you're good to go. Now if you do go to download and you see that it's a preview release or a pre-release, make sure you don't use that version. It's highly recommended to use the latest stable production release, which in my case here is on this page 3.5 for Linux. Alright, so if you're ready now to do a fresh install of Android Studio 3.5, which I am on Linux, let's begin. So I'm going to click on the Download Android Studio button. I'm going to agree to the terms and conditions, download it for Linux, and I'm going to save that. That's saving to my downloads folder because I'm in Firefox. Now while that's downloading, you might want to go and just have a look at some information. I'll just paste in this link, which is also available in the resources section of this video. There's some basic installation instructions there for Linux as well, and various flavors or distros of Linux are actually supported there with the information. Now this page mentions some required libraries you may need to install. There's no date on this page that I can see anyway, and we've found that these libraries don't seem to be needed for version 3.5 of Android Studio because as we've just seen, it's now fully 64-bit. But make a note of the link and come back here to install those libraries if you get any problems with missing 32-bit libraries. Now I'm installing on a fresh Ubuntu 18.04 LTS version, and I know that that doesn't have any of these libraries installed, and everything's worked fine, and as we'll see in this video, it should go through and install again now. Right, looking at our downloads over here, we can see that that's now finished. So I'm going to click on that now. That opens an archive manager. I'm going to close down the browser because we're pretty much finished with that for now. And I'm going to click on extract, and I need to choose the location where I'm going to install this. So I'm going to do it in my home folder. So I'm just going to select home up here and click on extract. Now you may want to install it to /usr/local instead. If you're comfortable with Linux file permissions, do whatever you'd normally do when installing software. But if you're new to Linux, then extracting to your home folder will work fine. We can see that that's finished. I'm going to close it down. And what we need to do now is open another terminal session. I know I closed it earlier in the video. Now a shortcut to opening a terminal session is Control-Alt-T, so I'll do that this time. We'll bring this over to the middle of the screen. We want to change our directory into the folder we just created, so cd // and it's going to be A for Android, and that should find it for us. And there's our Android Studio folder. And if we do an ls there, ls and have a look, we can see there's a bin folder. I'm going to click on, or select rather, third time lucky, I can go into that directory, I should say, cd bin as you saw me do. And there's actually a file in there called studio.sh, which we want to invoke. We're going to do that by typing /studio.sh, and that will invoke Android Studio. We can ignore that warning message there. And you see we're getting prompted now to do an import. You can see it's giving us the option to import settings from a previous installation. This can save you having to change all your settings again, but as we're doing a first time installation, I'm going to leave it on the default, which is do not import settings, and just click on OK. Once that pops up, I'm going to click on Don't Send to allow Google to collect anonymous usage data. You can click on Send if you prefer, but I'm clicking on Don't Send. We now are starting the Android, or have started the Android Studio Setup Wizard. So I'm going to click on Next. Now I'm going to choose a standard setup here. You can customize Android Studio later if you want to. Click on Next. We've got a choice of themes. Android Studio comes with two, as you can see. The standard one's called Light, and I'm going to leave it on that one because it comes up good in the video. But you can choose Dark Killer if you prefer, which is better on the eyes and generally what I would recommend for developers. Choose one of those, click on Next, and I'm going to click on Next again, because we've got some more downloading to do at this point. Now on this screen, before the download starts, it's popped up if your computer supports hardware virtualization. Now if you're using Ubuntu or a distro based on it, then you should already have KVM installed. If you're not sure, click the link and bookmark it in case you need to review the instructions later. And also keep in mind there's a video later in this section on making sure that VTX is enabled in your computer's BIOS, which may be an issue preventing you from using the accelerated performance mode. Now we do need to have VTX enabled because Android emulators run as virtual machines and we need KVM working. So this will make more sense later. For me, you can see that it has detected that, so I'm just going to click on Finish at this point. Android Studio is now downloading a lot of the tools that it needs, and this includes the Android SDK, Software Development Kit, which is actually quite large. So it'll actually download about 1.5 gigabytes of related material, files, etc. at this point. And if you do get a dialog asking you to retry at some point, just click Retry. Sometimes the download of some components fail for no apparent reason, and retrying it would generally fix it. Sometimes it does take more than one retry, and I've got no idea why this happens. Busy network perhaps, but in any event, if you do happen to see a retry, just go ahead and do that. Alright, so I'm going to speed up the video now while the components are actually downloaded here. Alright, as you see now that the components have all been downloaded, we've got a summary screen here, and it is worth scrolling up and down this if you haven't been there while it's downloading, just to make sure there's no errors. As you can see in my case, there's no errors showing and everything's up to date. So I'm going to click on Finish at this point. And just size it up so we can see everything. And I'm going to close down the... Well, actually, I need to leave that running for now. Now that Android Studio has started, it's a good idea to set up a desktop launcher so you don't have to keep running Android Studio from the terminal. To do that, there's a built-in option. Click on Configure and click on Create Desktop Entry down here. You've got the option to create it for all users if you want, but I'm not going to do that, and I'm just going to do it for the current user. Click on OK. At this point, we can now exit Android Studio, so I'm going to close that down. I'm also now going to exit the terminal window. And just to confirm that it's working, let's see if we can start the Android Studio. You can see there's a desktop entry there. I'm just going to click on that now. We should see that Android Studio will start for us. And you can see that we're good to go and Android Studio is working successfully on our Linux platform. Alright, so that's Android Studio installed. And one other thing I want to do before we finish the video is just make sure that KVM is actually working on this system. So I'll open up a terminal window again. I'm going to type KVM OK. And you can see in my system, because it's a brand new install, it's not installed. So I'm going to type sudo apt install CPU checker. And we'll install that, and then we'll actually check to see if the hardware virtualization is actually supported. We did see that earlier in the video, but KVM-OK now should work. And we'll run this as root just to check it. So sudo /usr/bin KVM-OK. Now my computer is showing at the moment that it doesn't support KVM, and the reason for that is this is a virtual machine. It's actually running on my Mac actually, and I'm recording it that way. So if you're installing this on a regular computer, you'd find that you'd have no dramas and everything would work properly. But that's a good way just to check that you are running, and if you find that there's any issues with you getting KVM extensions working, refer back to that link that I talked about earlier in the video, which hopefully you've bookmarked, and you can find out more information on how to go about actually getting that working. And just as another aside, if it's not working, search online to see if your processor in your computer supports VTX or AMD-V for an AMD processor, then watch the later video to enable it in your BIOS. That's the one that I talked about. In the past, virtualization was always enabled for AMD processors. Recent motherboards may also need SVM to be enabled, and that'll be in the security settings in your BIOS. Right, so I'm going to end the video here. In the next one, we need to do some configuration of Android Studio. The steps at this point on now are largely the same regardless of which operating system you're using. So I'll see you in the next video, which is titled Configure Android SDK for all 3 platforms. See you in the next video.